So the mob vote.
So the mob vote.
There were
Um,
three mobs: Glare, Something, and
the
Copper Golem.
Copper Golem, Glare, and Allay.
Allay, that's right.
Yeah,
So Glare was the first one that they revealed.
yeah.
What? So the Glare was almost looked like a bush plant type thing. Green, floating. Did they say how it spawned?
No, no. The they said, so they gave two pieces of information about the glare. Firstly, it doesn't like darkness, so it will go to the darkness and get grumpy.
Yeah, that that sounds contradictory. Doesn't quite make sense on the surface
Yes,
of it.
yes.
So, um, I was thinking, what? Um, surely there's some way of making that make sense.
Well, just now thinking about it, well, if you don't want to make it contradictory, say, what if it likes the darkness and it goes to the darkness, and then you've got an interesting conflict where the player wants to light up the area and the glare showing where you can light up the area, but the glare doesn't like the fact that you're lighting it up and it likes the darkness.
So the grumpiness is because you're lighting it up and not because it's dark.
You could say that, yeah. And that would have an interesting um, that would have interesting implications because, and from a player point of view, then you have to work out how you're going to interact with this creature who helps you, but what you're doing is counter to what it wants. So the other thing is a glare looks like it's trying to hide. It looks like a shady, camouflaged object, the creature that say would spawn in a dark oak forest, and for it to properly blend into a dark oak forest, you'd probably need to change its texture a bit.
Make
But
it a bit darker green.
yes, um, and this actually kind of links to a topic that I probably want to talk about earlier when we talk about the wild update and the frogs and stuff. But a, a lot of, especially the new mobs that seem to be added. I mean, the goat is better at this because it's white and it's a snow biome, but they don't really fit into the environments they're in. And it you could call it a giant missed opportunity potentially. Um,
Mm.
but and so yeah, I'll get into that later, and that seems very relevant with the glare because it's not obvious how it really integrates into the environment, and none of the three mobs. It's like the implication with the copper golem because of what it is. It's likely to be a constructed mob, so we don't have to worry about the environment so much with that. But with the Allay and the glare, it didn't quite seem, yeah. And so like the motivational things of even the Allay, it's like, why is it picking up the items and returning them to you? How would that integrate to a wild Allay? And now that becomes interesting with an Allay. Um, because then you've got the interaction of potentially like what if what if there's an interaction, say, between dolphins and the Allay because they both like to play with items? That could be interesting. And then if you've got the Allay and you've got the dolphin, and maybe the Allays could give items to each other, and I feel like in that sort of regard, the Allay had the most potential, and it wasn't very clear how the glare would fit into just the environment. Like, it looked like it was associated with moss, and so I don't know, maybe you'd have it spawning in a place where moss spawns. Yeah, lush caves.
You'd need it to be dark enough, though, in order for it to serve its purpose, because if it goes to dark areas, you don't want it spawning in light areas.
Yeah, yes, that's a good point. And so, like, what its niche is really unclear. And as far as, like, the utility of the mobs were concerned, I felt like the Allay was probably the most flexible because the glare and the because they all have a motivational structure, they all have an interesting mechanic that can potentially be exploited with. They seek out something, and so you can lure them around and potentially use that. But and as an item transportation system for the Allay, for example, imagine if you could use an Allay as a postal service. With the note blocks, it's very much less clear how the glare can, like, because it doesn't interact with the environment as much as just existing, and that's what makes, say, the copper golem and the Allay a lot more interesting, as far as I'm concerned.
Because they can both be useful in. They've both got long-term usefulness, while the glare only has temporary usefulness in lighting up an area, then it's useless.
Yes, that's another good point. And so I personally feel that it would be possible to replace the glare with, say, a particle effect that just occasionally comes up from any block that a mob can spawn on. And it's just these maybe black particles that come up, and that would replace the glare.
And those black particles would also make lore-wise sense, because how do the mobs spawn? It must be some kind of magic effect, and particles are already used to signify magical effects, so that would make perfect sense if it was done like that.
Yeah, and so I'm not surprised that the glare wasn't chosen.
Yeah, same here.
So that would leave the Allay and the copper golem. Which one would you have picked out of the two?
I think I'd have gone with the Allay.
Yeah, same.
The copper golem, while it looks fun and could quite possibly be useful, at the moment I think it's just not quite useful enough, I guess, because everyone wants more things to move their. Everyone wants more things to move their items, but automating pressing buttons does not feel that useful.
Yeah, no, and it's also very narrow, like, it's, like, only copper buttons. Like, if there was, like, a set of more complex, or like a greater set of rules for how the copper golem operates. Like, maybe it's all buttons, but it prefers the copper buttons. And so if it has a choice, it'll go to the copper buttons, or something like that. And then, like, the utility of copper buttons, other than it's for the copper golem to press. I mean, I guess you've got the aesthetics of a copper button versus a stone button or a wooden button, and that's nice, but it doesn't seem useful, like particularly meaningful. And so I'm also with the Allay. I think all three of them suffered from somewhat just being too narrow in its application, especially the glare, and then the copper golem was the next most narrow, and then you've got the Allay, and that's why the Allay won. It had the most potential to please most people, because it was the most widely applicable out of everything, and just had the most potential. You've got both the note block motivational structure, which is beyond everything else. It's just fun to have something responding to note blocks, but you've like got two rules for it. Like, it'll pick up items and it'll interact with note blocks. And so I feel like the thing with the Allay and making it a good addition to the game is just if the developers make sure they make it as widely applicable as possible.
Yeah, the more application it has, the more people will enjoy it.
Yeah. And it's like, people don't mind the crafting table because, I don't know, it sort of makes sense. It gives you it gives you a larger crafting area, and that sort of makes sense that you can only craft a little bit on yourself, and that's a nice limitation. But then you've got all these other crafting benches which do one specific thing, and they might do it better than the crafting table, but they don't really add anything. The cartography table is probably the best, except because like you'll have the stone cutter and the cartography table, and both of them, like, they do things that you can already do otherwise. It's nothing new, but
Well, the cartography table allows you to lock maps, which is new. And
okay.
But yeah, I think its other purposes are also doable via the crafting table.
Yeah. And that makes them less interesting and less useful, and it feels a little more like a chore, and like, why are you making me build something else just to make this more efficient? And that said, I would say the blast furnace is, like, the blast furnace and smoker mechanic seems nicer, but then still what the blast furnace can actually smelt seems like such a narrow range. It's not worth the effort of having it.
Yeah. I don't think anyone uses the blast furnace as a furnace.
Yeah.
Instead, they use it as the black station.
Yeah, and if you just need it faster, it's more efficient to just build two furnaces. And sure, it takes more space, but it's just as fast.
Yeah.
And yeah, it doesn't feel like it adds to the game at all and doesn't provide value. And I heard someone once say that the mark of good engineering is not that nothing else needs to be added, it's that nothing else can be removed. And I think that's an example of that. That there's a lot of redundancy, but it's not a useful redundancy. It's an annoying redundancy.
Yeah.
So, like, for the mob votes in the future, I feel like I'd prefer them to make more generally applicable mobs that aren't like just for picking up items, but are designed to interact with their world and fill a niche both more within the environment, because how they interact with the environment generally will give you mechanics that you can creatively use for in potentially a wider variety of ways.
But remember, as yet we don't have the Allay doesn't have a full feature list.
Exactly.
We've only got the basic features, so it could still be changed to do what you're suggesting.
Exactly, but that's where I'd like them to start, is with how does it interact with its environment? Because as it feels like they've already prescribed, this is how you will use the mob. And aside from taking away creativity, it just narrows the potential, and they'd have to go backwards on it in order to give that wider potential. And so it feels like the solution to that is just start at a different point next time.
Well, I see what you're saying. I don't think it's as easy as that, because if you start with how does it interact with the environment, that is very vague, very abstract, and you don't even know what environment it will be in, and it doesn't give you any pointers as to what it could do.
Well,
Whereas starting with, let's think of what could be a mob that helps us point out darkness. What could be a mob that picks up items? And then working from there, that gives a lot more flexibility.
The problem with those things is that it doesn't like, for the glare example, it seems to ignore the possibility that maybe the glare, or maybe that there's a better solution to that problem. And although that isn't an issue inherent to the process, but when looking to design a mob to solve a problem, that firstly, that isn't really fully understanding the problem, and so that just seems like it's not going to be a great way to solve the problem to begin with. It's just a lot less likely to actually properly solve the problem. That's the first thing. Secondly, what makes, say, dolphins interesting? Part of that, they're ambient mobs, yes, but they sort of have a motivational structure of play with items, interact with the player, and that gives them a defined character. And it always delights me to see a dolphin around, just because it's having fun and interacting with the environment as much as something that's scripted can have fun. But I feel like you open up to more possibilities with starting with a different angle, like, and it I don't have a problem with, say, the fact that the Allay interacts with items, but instead of saying it picks up items and returns them to note blocks as a starting point, say, well, maybe the Allay loves music and it's a communal mob, and so what it does is it'll nest around note blocks, or like it's got this like romantic say like a bowerbird, because that's what it reminds me of, the idea of picking up items and returning them to a point, like a bowerbird which picks up beautiful items and returns it to the nest and integrates it into the nest. If you did something like that with the Allay in the wild, then it provides potential for all those things that would come out of the Allay anyway.
Yeah. So what you're saying is start off with the behavior.
Yes.
So we want a mob that picks up items. Why might it do it? It might be doing this to sort of create a nest.
Or I guess I'd start with saying, what does the mob want? Okay, and then how does it achieve that on its own? Because I guess part of the issue I'm seeing is these mobs, when the mobs are designed around the player, it's very unclear how they would operate without the player. You have, say, an iron golem, which is used for an iron farm, but yeah, so what I was saying about the motivational structure, like, start with the motivational structure and a way for the mobs to be existing without the player. I wonder if the entire, like, designing the mobs around the uses, because I was just thinking about, like, what the mobs were last year. And we had the glow squid, the moo bloom, and what's the third one?
The
Isolager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were all environment and zero use.
Yes.
And so that was too far the other extreme.
Yes, and I'm asking for something in the middle, I guess.
And yeah, the iron golem, as you brought up, is a nice example of something that started out as an ambient mob, but easily had function.
Yes, because it interacted with the world and it had a basic mechanic. Like, everything drops something, and so what does the iron golem drop? Well, iron, I guess. And it fits perfectly into the mob's character and what it is. And it turns out there's a very effective use for that. It's
But
like,
does the glare need? Sorry, not glare. Copper golem needs such environmental behavior because it is a player-made being.
I'd probably give that one a pass because of that. However, I think without considering that side of the golem, you have a problem of if nothing else, missing potential. Yeah. What would be interesting, because the copper golem, when I heard that it like freezes up over time, my first thought was like gargoyle.
Yeah.
And
And that's definitely something that's effectively what they were going for, I guess, with their statue idea.
yeah, and that could be interesting if it was just made a little bit more complex. Like, you've got a mechanic like, say, like, I don't know, so it's when it's struck by lightning, it like unfreezes, and
Yeah, because
that's
lightning deoxidizes copper.
yeah, and like that's cool. But then like, what does it do when once it's deoxidized? Does it just wander around aimlessly?
I assume
And
it
that's
regains its behavior it had before.
yeah, and like that's the question. It's like, does it do anything to avoid freezing up or anything like that, or is it just completely not self-aware? Yeah, it. I think the copper bot golem had interesting potential. There are a lot of
Yeah,
questions.
I can't quite see the potential it had though.
Well, you've got the idea of it being a gargoyle, and so if you have something player created which freezes, and then depending on what it does in the meantime, that could create an interesting interaction where sometimes it's frozen and sometimes it's doing something. Because in some ways, like, or every other mob just constantly does what it does in exactly the same way all of the time, while a gargoyle, aside from a copper golem, I'm just gonna call them gargoyles now. A gargoyle, with freezing over time, firstly, it marks the passage of time. Secondly, it has a deep interaction with the world that actually has an impact. And I feel like a lot of what happens in Minecraft now really just doesn't have an impact. And I guess part of that's because like the world needs to be like unchanged. For like, if you make a world, then it needs to be like unchanged. And a good example of that is the Enderman. And the problem with the Endermen interacting with the world is that like they'll destroy your builds.
But they do have limitations on what they can pick up. I think it's purely dirt and gravel and sand.
But then they'll just drop that all through the build.
Yeah.
Because they can teleport into light. You can't keep them away. And it's somewhat problematic that you don't have control over it. I mean, that said, there's also a nice element to that because you're having to maintain it, and it makes it somewhat more real. The fact that you actually have to maintain it and do something about that. Of course, there's a question of whether you want that in the game of Minecraft. And like, because part of the value in a game is the ability to escape the real world.
Yeah, you want a nice balance of tasks and exploration.
Yeah. And So it would, I think, the copper golem would be an interesting way, if developed properly, could provide depth to the world of Minecraft in a way that we haven't really seen before. Because you've got the destructive depth of like Enderman and creepers, but with a copper golem, it could be a little more interesting.
Yeah, would be a little difficult though. Definitely have to be careful with how you did it.
Yeah.
Okay, here's an interesting tidbit.
Yeah.
The mob vote was preferential voting.
Ooh. Has it been like that in previous votes?
As far as I remember, yeah, it's all the votes with 3 mobs or 3 biomes. Yeah, they've been preferential voting. It's been
Because it eliminates one and then you can vote again. Is that what
yeah, it
you're...
eliminates the worst. So in preferential voting, um, you vote for all the mobs in terms of your favorite, and then whenever once all the mobs have been voted for,
Yeah.
you get rid of the one with the least first place votes, and then the second place votes are distributed. With the mob vote, that's effectively what it was. You had all the second place mobs, all the people who voted for the glare got to vote for their second preference.
Yes. Although the slight, I guess, difference to conventional preferential voting there is that everyone who voted for the top two also get to vote again.
Yeah, but I doubt people will change
Probably
their vote,
not.
because if they've already decided which one they want and that one is getting through, why change?
Well, if you did change your vote, if you're someone out there who changed your vote, let us know in the comments why you did that. I'd be very interested to know.
And yeah, what made you change your decision from your first place to your second place?
That
Further to the mobs,
Yeah.
although this is going past the mob vote and more just mobs, it sounds like Mojang has more mobs in the back burner that they've got for this. I can't remember the exact wording, but it sounds like they've already got others identified that they might choose.
Yeah. So yeah, I didn't have anything else on the mob vote, so did you want to move to the next major topic?
Sure. I guess it all fits
Also,
in with the wild update, the rest of it.
they also talked a bit about the previous update.
Did they though?
Yeah,
I don't.
they did right at the start of the video. Did you
They
watch
said
that bit?
that they said that the deep dark would be moved until the wild update.
Yeah. So it was just like, so the way they were talking about the update. And so there's a quote from Henrik Kniberg here. What's interesting about this is when you look at that video, like initially the plan was just big mountains and natural looking cool mountains and caves. But as we started working on it, the scope kind of grew because we realized that we need to change all the terrain to make this all fit together. But once we started seeing that work, and it was so fun to see the team started realizing that we're really onto something, this is going to be great. Seeing that inspiration spread, and also spread out to our community through the snapshots has been really fun. So I listened to him saying that, and I thought that was really interesting. What happened there was they ended up doing everything, and the operative part of that quote for me is we realized that we need to change all the terrain to make this all fit together. And that was interesting because I in contrast to, say, this is the this Caves and Cliffs Part 2 has been the first update I'm aware of that they've really gone back to things and worked on making everything fit together and work together. And part of it reminded me of the combat snapshots, which I don't know if they're still working on them because I haven't seen anything about that for a while.
Yeah, I think they've been put on hold.
Yeah. But it's the thought of making everything fit together. I kind of have thoughts on this, but I'm really struggling to articulate them in my mind so that I can actually talk about them.
They're creating a system that fits together, that feels like it belongs together. And
Yes.
not only just for Java, but also Bedrock, and the two of them together.
Yes. And there's something about that consistency. Like there's also the idea, because it's such a fundamental part of the world, like the world generation generally affects everything from like the builders to the explorers to the speedrunners. It really affects everyone and the experience of everyone. And so it's a very powerful update to be working on from that point of view. But then we've also got just the because I think part of what got me about that was the contrast to the mobs, for example. The mob, and what I was saying about the mobs existing in sort of isolation and not having been really integrated into the environment that much. And when we get later to, again, this is part of what I was saying about the wild update with the frogs. One of the things that really struck me about the frogs was that they looked completely out of place in the swamp. Completely. And part of that was they just exist there. They don't interact with it. They're not... Like, you have all these mobs.
They will be interacting with the Fireflies, which are in the swamps.
But then that's still in general, like it wouldn't have to happen in a swamp. There's no reason it would have to happen in a swamp. And that disconnectedness kind of takes away from the immersion of the game somewhat. And because part of what makes like something visually appealing is the way it interacts and is all connected. And so with the mobs and the world generation, it got me thinking that it's like, because you have wolves, for example, and they will run around killing sheep, but then like once there's no other sheep, they just exist there and they're out of place. They don't belong. You take them away and nothing would change.
Yeah.
nothing about the environment needs them there. And like, they'll hunt the sheep, but they don't need to hunt the sheep. They're just doing that just 'cause. And aside from just a lack of depth there, it also, with the wolves, it takes away potential for like, because here's the thing with wolves, and part of the problem with wolves is wolves have no sense of danger. They will attack something until they die. Regardless of how low health they are, regardless of the fact that what they're attacking has thorns, and so attacking that thing hurts them. There's no... And of course, then you've got every dog is the same, and that's also an analogy to what the terrain update was, because every instance of a biome was the same, and now it's not. It's highly dependent on the environment, and the terrain can be just about anything, and the terrain does interact with lava. The terrain does interact with, say, the terrain does interact with the biomes and what's there and all of that. And that makes the terrain interesting, but it also provides a lot more variation.
Yeah. To be honest, I'm kind of not focusing on that so much.
Okay. Maybe we should move on, because I'm still struggling to work out what I wanted to say about that. I didn't really write down the best notes about that part.
Maybe.
But the other thing I wanted to say about the so they're delaying the on the topic of the wild update, if we can just sort of segue over to that.
Yeah.
So they've delayed the Deep Dark, and as far as I can tell, the community's reaction to that was almost entirely positive.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's amazing, considering how negative the atmosphere was to the idea of delaying Caves and Cliffs Part 2.
That is true, yeah.
I think...
maybe the community is getting more used to this, that it is a reality, that things won't always come out exactly when expected.
More than that, they've learned that it's worth it. Because what happened with Caves and Cliffs Part 2 was it was delayed, and everyone was going, why are you delaying it? It's not that hard. And everyone just wanted it released immediately because they thought it was already good enough. But I think the developers or Mojang proved a couple things with that. Firstly, they know more about what makes the game good than the community does.
Than the general community.
Community does, yes. I mean, the community as a whole, if it collaborated properly, has more brain power than the devs. But they know what they're doing about, but they're also doing it well. And they've bought themselves a massive lot of trust. And if they can do that again with the Deep Dark, and they already sort of have, because like they said they delayed the Deep Dark, and then just from that point, as I could kind of tell from comments timestamps, because I wasn't actually online at that time. What can what I can tell is like even from the first time they mentioned that they were delaying the deep dark, the community response was positive and hopeful and excited because they're delaying the deep dark. It must be a good thing.
Yeah.
And so if they can curry through that trust, I think Mojang has done a wonderful thing with delaying the Caves and the Cliffs update and putting a ton of effort into it and doing it really well. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and that trust, as long as they don't waste it, which I don't think they will, given their track record,
Yeah.
will stick around for a while to come.
Yes. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens. By the sounds of it, the deep dark is almost done because Agnes said the release should be in a month or two.
The
And
Deep Dark is waiting till the Wild update, which is 2022.
oh yes, that's right. Sorry, the Caves and the Cliffs Part 2 is in a month or two.
Yeah, I guess it turned out to be part one was all of the new mobs and blocks, and part two was all of the new terrain, which I
Yes.
don't have a problem with.
No. No, I don't either. Um, I mean, the mobs and the blocks are the relatively easy part.
Yeah,
And
there's
they're a bit they're a requirement for the terrain, so they have to come first anyway.
yeah.
On the topic of the deep dark, thoughts and impressions?
I really like that they're bringing in more structures, more lore to explore.
Hmm.
And the way they're doing it, they mentioned that it will be underneath existing worlds, and so it's like this place that you've never been to, and you because you just haven't explored there, and now you can explore there. You go there, and it adds this whole extra element of there's this world below your world.
Yes. And I think that's going to be magical for a lot of people who haven't been following too closely with these updates. Like, say if they go down their mine and it's like, oh, there's no bedrock anymore, and they start mining, and then eventually they'll run into the deep dark. And
It
aside from running
gives
into
a
all the
real
caves and
natural,
stuff, hmm?
gives a really natural way for players to find the new content without having to
Yeah.
um, arbitrarily search ungenerated chunks.
Yes. Okay, so there's some raw iron that hasn't been smelted and some actual iron.
Cool. That's I think about as much as I have altogether, including my tools.
Yeah. I've like been going like every 5 blocks and there's just more iron. It's crazy. Plus, I had
So,
a bit of a cave system, so yeah. That said, I've been playing through the snapshots, and it seems like there's a lot less iron at every level except right up the top of the world, and that's been actually kind of nice to, because it's felt like I've always been rushed through progression in older version, like 1.17 and earlier, because it's just, you can literally find diamonds in 5 minutes if you're really trying hard. I mean, I'm not trying hard because I've done it like a 3 wide mine. So,
same 3 wide, 3 high tunnel.
yeah. Yes. So yeah.
And for some reason, it's quite aesthetically pleasing, especially when decorated.
Yes, it is. I think that's partly because it just gets out of your view. it just takes it away 1 block on every side.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Gold ore doesn't give gold ore anymore. Guess
No,
raw.
it gives raw.
I miss getting the ore blocks because, as far as I'm concerned, that's the pretty part of gold.
Mm.
So, more iron. So yeah, and I think that what they've done with the Warden fight and the Shriekers and the Skulk, I really love that because it's very tightly integrated and it works really well together. I'm curious to know whether the Warden will also react to other mobs. Because then it'll kind of like grow the Skulk on its own.
Yeah, and that could be the source of a Skulk farm. I'd assume so because currently it reacts to stuff such as nobles and
Yeah.
eggs. So it only makes sense that it responds to other mobs.
And so that might make going around the deep dark an interesting experience. Though what they said about it can like smell you and so it'll know where you are anyway. Firstly, I wonder how close it has to be for that to work. Secondly, I'm worried that that might mean that you have no choice but to engage the Warden, and then the only way you'll ever interact with the Warden is it's gonna be chasing you down.
Well, looking at the video that they gave of gameplay, Warden
Yeah.
gameplay, it looks like it was possible to avoid the Warden. If you come in crouching and you only mine Shriekers, then it's possible to avoid the Warden. Barely, but it is.
Okay. Yeah. So that would imply that it has to be at least a certain distance away from you, in order to in order to smell you and narrow in on you. What I do like about the Warden is it sounds very difficult to cheese.
Yeah. I'm curious about the entire going into the wall, mine a couple of blocks and avoid it strategy though. Because currently that seems to be the way people are planning on cheesing it.
What I'm thinking is that while you're in the wall, you'll be safe, but you're going to have plenty of reason to come out from that wall. And if and when you do, you're not going to be so safe.
Okay, can you list some of those reasons?
Like, just looking at the layout of the village, the underworld, the deep dark, to me it gave the impression that there's a lot of open spaces and that there are a lot of spaces where you won't necessarily be able to be in the wall. With the Skulk blocks storing XP, I thought that was very interesting mechanic.
Storing or using?
Storing it. Because, like, the mob will die on it, and the XP will go into the block. And then you
It'll
have
use
to...
that XP to then create a new Skulk block. It doesn't store it for the player to use later. It uses it itself.
But then when you mined the block, you get it.
Okay.
That's the impression I got.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that it gave XP when you mined it, but yeah, I didn't get the impression it was the same XP, but I might have been misreading the situation.
Yeah. So I'm interested. It's an interesting mechanic, and it's kind of cool that it does that and it interacts with the XP in some way. And I'm kind of excited to see more things integrated with each other a bit more. Yeah, I'm just excited to see what they do with it.
Yeah, great potential.
Yeah.
From the little we've seen, what do you think about the ruins? What do you think might be the lore behind them?
Or I'm hoping they're somehow connected to strongholds, and they potentially maybe even update strongholds. Sorry. Yeah, I'm kind of hoping they update strongholds to match.
Because
Yeah.
the strongholds feel more like a fortress, underground fortress,
Yes.
while these drawings feel more like an underground city.
Yes. But I feel like they should be linked somehow. And even if just to say, like, hey, the strongholds were made to hide from the deep dark or something like that. Because the strongholds really do exist in such isolation to everything. So you've got the ruined portals, which is like an expansion of the entire Bastion Piglin sort of
Feel.
yeah. And so that's linked together, and then you've got villages which are sort of linked to the idea of igloos and all that. And then you've got like desert temples and jungle temples which seem appropriately unnamed and disconnected, because they're
monasteries, monks there.
Yes.
Separate from the rest of the world. They're supposed to be isolated.
Yes. But a stronghold, like, strongholds don't even have a connection to the surface, most of them, by design.
Yeah.
And like their layout and things like that doesn't seem to lend to a story. It seems random and kind of unexplained. And what I see most with the Skulk is something that or with the end portal, with the existence of the new Skulk, it looks like there's some sort of relationship between an end portal is Skulk plus endstone. And that sort of makes me wonder if we'll be able to make end portals, maybe. And maybe even mine them. I don't know. That's highly unlikely, I also think. But,
yeah. Would be interesting and cool if possible, though.
But I'm pretty sure that because of the visual similarity, it's something that they must have at least considered. Even though I think they would have decided no for it. The other interesting thing, I don't know if you'd have noticed this, but the torches that were in the deep dark.
They looked like candles rather than torches to me.
They had sulfire torches.
Okay.
Yeah, like right at the start, there's sulfire you can see. And then, okay, they've got sulfire lanterns and candles. So
Okay, so it has some connection to the Nether then
And,
as
yeah.
well.
Clearly, yes. If we show the browser here, yeah. So
Wow, it's
I don't know how much of that caught, but yeah. Yeah. It's I noticed that immediately, and of course it's deep slate and all that, and they're the only significant things I noticed about its makeup.
Okay.
So I'm interested what that means, because you've almost got a connection between the Nether and the End there, with the potential visual similarities between the Skulk and the Nether, the End portal.
Yeah. And this could be interesting, suggesting that there's an indication, a purpose for you to go to the end, because someone else has been to the end first.
Yes, and that's why I'm excited for a potential connection between that and the stronghold. I'm excited for the potential connection with the stronghold and the deep dark.
Yes, yeah, that does lend itself to many things that sounds great.
The other thing is they called them ancient cities, I believe.
Okay, so they are exactly ancient cities.
Yeah, but what kind of piques my interest about that is ancient debris. I don't know if that's a deliberate similarity, but there are so many similarities between things.
So are you suggesting that possibly this is another link, but the ancient debris in the Nether is possibly linked to the cities in the overworld in the deep dark? And so
I
the deep
feel
dark
like
is
it's
almost
quite
like an
possible.
intermediate. The deep dark's almost like an intermediate dimension between the Nether and overworld.
Yes. Yeah. That seems quite possible. I was thinking maybe we could get into swamp biome stuff as next.
Sure.
But
Yep.
I was thinking we might maybe mention something smaller in the meantime.
Okay.
So there was one thing I wanted to mention on the idea of them preserving existing worlds, and I think this is part of the, like, it links to the idea of trust with the terrain update and how, like, the community response to that, because yeah, Agnes at 5157 said Minecraft should be a game you can trust, because we know that it works and it will work for many years. Then you can spend all this love and time on your Minecraft world. It also adds to reflecting the care and the consideration they have for the players of the game, which I guess really helps build that trust. And it was really nice to see that, and making all that work together with the terrain blending and then the extending the world underground. Like, those are technical challenges. Those are real technical challenges. And if you're doing them with the intention of making sure it doesn't mess things up, that's going to be really difficult, because they're going to have to put in the effort to get it right.
Yeah, and it's not like they'll be using all of that again and again. The biome blending, yes, but not the terrain, not the underground.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be years before the average computer is powerful enough to have an extend again, probably.
Almost certainly.
Yeah, so I thought it was just worth mentioning that and bringing that up again, as because and reinstating just how appreciative I am, and I hope the entire community is, about that. Because yeah, the idea of being able to keep my existing worlds and integrate that with everything is rather exciting.
Certainly.
Um,
You don't want to lose what you've been working on for quite a while.
yeah, and I like a lot of other games and a lot of companies in general. It's like they'll do things out of complete lack of consideration for their player base, because it's cool and it's a marketing gimmick, or that they can make more money out of it now, and it seems really short-sighted. And I feel like Minecraft has now started to become a very powerful example for exactly how well it can go when you put the care in to do it well, and actually care for the user and build that trust, and it's worth it.
Yeah.
And I hope other game companies realize it's worth it, and other companies in general, like tech companies, like I don't know, it's like, to tie it to Apple, it's like really appreciated how I can still use my six-year-old phone for their latest versions. But anyway.
Yeah, that compatibility is quite nice. So long as it doesn't hold back future.
Yeah. So I glanced through my notes, and there are a couple of things we missed talking about the Deep Dark. Firstly, the darkness effect with the Warden and
Yes.
the Shriekers.
That was interesting, giving a new effect to the player.
I love it. And I love it because that's going to make the Warden difficult in another new way, that and partly it's like that vastly reduces how cheesable it is. But not just how cheesable it is, it's going to require an entirely new set of skills. And it's going to be, honestly, possibly one of the most challenging interactions there is. But, and the other thing about the Deep Dark was mining things with a hoe. What do you think about that?
I don't really have a problem with that. I kind of think of the hoe as a scythe.
Okay.
That's not
It
the
just...
right word. I think of it as the tool used to harvest grass, wheat, manually.
Yeah, that's a scythe.
Okay, yeah. That's what I think of the hoe as.
Yeah,
And it's just unfortunate that it's called a hoe and so appears to be limited to farming.
but it's like... Those blocks look too hard for something like that. They look like it needs to be a pickaxe, something weighty. Like, I'd be weird if a sword could mine it.
Yeah,
It just doesn't seem right to me.
okay.
I guess you don't have a problem with it. I
No, I
mean,
don't.
that's fine. Like, because I feel like the community in general appreciates having a use for hose. Which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. It's always just felt a little weird to me. Even if I can't exactly place why.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, there are horses over here if you have a saddle.
Not yet.
Okay. I shall refrain from ranting about how hard it is to find saddles. It, like, horses are everywhere, and it's like, it's easier to acquire an elytra than acquire a saddle. Why? Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration.
It
But,
is easier to acquire an elytra than a saddle because an elytra is an RNG feature in above ground objects, while a saddle is RNG in below ground
well,
objects.
you can find saddles uh, in
Us
villages.
metaphor purposes.
Yeah, I just don't understand why a saddle you can't craft it. Like a leather 2-string, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, there's a new snapshot out.
Yeah, not much in it, just new music.
Okay.
It's not bad. I'll put it that way. I I didn't mind the nether music being different music because the nether's different, but I feel like the new overworld music is potentially going to feel out of place. I say potentially because I've only heard tiny excerpts of it. So, who knows?
Okay.
Okay, so biodiversity. What did you think about that?
I like the idea. I like that they're wanting to differentiate the biomes because right now they're rather similar. What's
Yeah.
the difference between a birch forest and the forest? Well, the birch forest doesn't have any oak trees.
Yeah, it's like just replace the oak trees with the birch trees.
But yeah, giving it all an identity, separating them, making it clear what they are, I think that's a good step, and I think that also fits with the wild update. That is, it's making it a lot more neater, a lot more fitting, a lot more immersive.
Yeah. I'd like I have weird thoughts on this because when thinking about that, I start to go like, well, let's just forego the entire idea of biomes because, like, we've removed the idea of terrain from biomes, and now we've removed, and now we're wanting to give them back sort of their own unique character a bit. And it's like, sometimes I wonder, it's like, what if grass color was just based off, I don't know, humidity, which was, or just temperature? If, what if like the trees that spawned in an area, again, was based off temperature, and then like how much there are depend on something else, and so it's no longer an issue of it's no longer an issue of specifying which biome it is, but just going, well, here's the terrain we have, here's how we design, here's the general principles behind how we fill that terrain, and we just let the world make the beauty for us. But I think in part what they need is for the basis for that is probably some of the variety that they're going to be adding in this update. To like add the biodiversity, because part of what I've noticed, and should we talk about the swamps now?
Sure.
And so just looking for the concept art for the swamps, it looked very bare, was my impression of it.
Okay.
And especially when you had the frogs, like part of it's like you have the old swamps, which actually felt very swampy to me, especially with the watercolor, and that was very nice. I thought that was very nice. But then we the swamps, the watercolor, and they showed the mangroves off, but what struck me about both of them was just how barren they were. There was it's just, I guess the swamp has like the tall grass and the flowers, but then other than that it was just dirt, grass, and trees. And then
that's all it is now: dirt, grass, and trees, and water.
Yes, it just started to stand out a lot in the update, especially for the mangroves. And it stood out even more once they put the frog there. Because, and this is where I'm starting to think about the integration between the environment and the mobs, because the frog's got no predators. It's got no reason to hide. It's got no reason to choose the swamp over anywhere else, other than the fact that it's got no reason to choose the swamp over anywhere else, other than the fact that the game code makes it spawn there. It's got no reason to stay there and prefer there. And that, like, you can notice that sort of becoming an issue where you have, say, highly dense cow farms. Like, aside from everything else, like, that's an unpleasant sight, but there's no mechanic discouraging that, and other than just organization and visual pleasantness, but there's no benefit to making it nice. And because there aren't any limitations, it's harder to find like beauty, I guess. within the game.
Yeah.
And it's okay to just have mobs wandering around everywhere and just a growing number of mobs, or just wolves sitting around killing any sheep that spawn, or just frogs sitting there and hopefully the fireflies reproduce on their own, because otherwise you're just gonna run out of fireflies because the frogs are eating them.
I think most likely they'll just keep spawning rather than...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, sure, I understand that, and then then it'll be useful to have frogs around because they'll keep the firefly population under control. Of course, there'll be a mob cap for that, but then it's like the frog just stands out, and then you're just gonna have a mess of frogs. They don't hide, they don't blend in, they don't interact with the environment at all. Because in real life, it's like frogs blend in. They have to blend in, otherwise they die. And they have to find food, or they'll die. They have to and I guess in part that's a deliberate... Oh, nice. In part that's a deliberate decision by Mojang, I guess, because they don't want really the world to pressure you into doing things. But they already pressure you to light things up, for example, just to keep yourself safe. And I wonder if that line's been drawn a little too far in the wrong direction.
In order to keep it sandbox like they keep it, so there's no requirements on you.
Yes, and I start to feel like I disagree with the direction they've taken. I feel like the game should be opinionated on how you play it at first, but then it should give you the power to master it and forge your own way.
Yeah.
And like it does with light, it's like, well, the mobs are gonna spawn at night or in the caves, and it's like, you have control over that. And unfortunately, you don't have the control over having no light and no visual indication that you're keeping the mobs away, and keep the mobs away. That's a bit of a shame, and something I would very much appreciate having in the game.
That's a huge contentious matter.
Well, it's like some people say it's an endgame, it has to be an endgame item, and I'm like, but why? Torches stop mobs from spawning. Because what I'd like to see is just a simple block that maybe just looks like a torch, and you can cover it up, and it does everything, like, maybe it's like a stick and a mycelium, because mycelium already keeps mobs, or at least stops mobs from spawning. Or the mushroom biome does, not the mycelium.
Yeah.
But it's already associated with stopping mobs from spawning. So you can do that, and okay, mycelium is a little hard to find and come across, and so maybe that fills the category of endgame item, but it allows the player to tame the world and retain their creative freedom. And and so it's, I feel like there should be more mechanics like that, allowing the player to retain the creative freedom while also being opinionated, because you could provide the player with a complete blank slate and power to do anything they want, that's creative mode in super flat.
Yeah.
Or even super flat isn't a completely blank slate. But
Default super flat, isn't? Yeah.
yeah. But the idea of, and if players want that, they can have that, but the rest of the world, the general world, I feel needs to be designed to be interesting and complex and out of the player's control initially, such that they can go on a journey of bringing it under control progressively, in which case the progression stops becoming about find diamonds and light up the area, but becomes a more in-depth taming the environment. And part of that is giving the environment a character and giving things a habitat and developing that more. I like, even if you don't make like, and I mean, this is like an extreme, because you can go a little bit backwards from that and just say, okay, we're just going to give these animals a habitat that looks like the habitat you'd find in the real world, but they're not going to interact with that habitat if it's not if the game isn't opinionated about how these animals are supposed to exist in the game.
Yeah.
And I guess then you need a compromise of like, okay, how can you retain your creative freedom while the game is opinionated about how you look after your animals? And so I guess you can provide a certain degree of freedom within that in order to take back control. And I feel like that would create more depth and more potential in the game rather than limiting the player. And it would do sort of what the terrain update has done. It gives the player more of a slate, because terraining takes an insane amount of time to do, because there's just so much of it to do. Like,
Yes. Yeah. And it becomes almost impossible early game.
yes, it does. And so, and it also provides a slate on which you provide inspiration for the player. And
Yeah.
and it's like you're helping the player, because the player can't do everything on their own, and so they can have the option to build their own terrain. Again, that's super flat. And I don't know if they should necessarily double down on that, or I mean, it's still possible for them to take control of the terrain and make it how they want in the real world, but providing a slate that isn't empty but is emptyable, but that is caters to the people who don't have the time or the skill to develop their own world, or even the inspiration, and like giving them that inspiration. If you do that in like the ecosystem and the biodiversity and all of that as well, that could lend a lot to the game.
Yeah.
And hopefully not get in the way like of players like the hermit crafters. Like, I would imagine it would complement them, and it wouldn't get in the way of technical players, I hope. But that's the idea. And so it's like I saw that with the tadpoles and the frogs. It's just, the tadpoles had nowhere to hide. They didn't need to hide. They didn't have, and they...
Because they had no threat, and so the world feels empty.
Yes. And not only empty, it just feels bland and meaningless, because if you have things interacting in a way, that starts to make the world be vibrant and meaningful. Like everyone's everyone's like everyone talks about like adding strategy to mining because other than the fact that you had to be at a certain level to make it most efficient, then you had you had to be at a certain level to make it most efficient, and so all you were doing was watching a number, and the most meaningful thing you did down there was uncover an ore just by doing the same repetitive thing over and over, or have to run away from lava or try to get through a cave. And I feel the new update has actually, because I've been playing through the snapshots a bit, the new update has made caves less scary. And so, like, you don't even have to be that afraid of caves anymore and taming them as you did in previous versions of the game. And part of that is just you've got high visibility. Visibility is extremely important to staying safe because you know where is safe and where isn't. You know where the threats are. And so you don't walk around the corner into a creeper anymore. But it's... everything is still meaningless. It's like all diorite or granite is not what you're looking for still. And so it's still boring, it's still uninteresting, and it's not... it doesn't engage you in any meaningful way. I mean, sure, you have to just go to Minecraft wiki to work out which level is the best one to mine at for whatever you're looking for. And I've got things to say about that too, about like depending on the wiki of your game for players to learn about it. It's
not very good game design.
No, and there's what seems to me to be a very simple solution to that, which I greatly hope that Mojang sees sometime in the future and uses. But yeah, what was I saying? What was I talking about?
We were talking about making the world feel light.
Yeah, and so you've got mining, say, and it's like, this is a bad idea, but say, like, you have, the first part of the idea isn't so bad, but, like, you have layers of rocks, and so instead of having random layers of blocks, random patches of blocks that are just blobby and honestly completely ugly, it's really unpleasant. And like you'll see that in clay and in swamps, it's like you actually make it to, like, instead of just being completely random, oh there's a blob of it here, you say it's like, oh there's a layer of this, and then it has some sort of interaction and significance, and not something like something that's complex, ideally just a little bit, so that it's like you don't have there are enough things it could mean that you actually have to think about it for more than 5 seconds, sort of. And so you have these layers, and the layers maybe spawn randomly, and they're of random size, but you know you'll only find diamond in diorite, for example. And so you find diorite, and then you just mine out all the diorite because you're looking for diamonds, and that suddenly becomes meaningful and interesting. And then you can choose, like, you can look for an area which has 2 layers that of things that you're looking for and mine between them, potentially.
Yeah. That would add strategy to mining a lot more.
Yeah, And more than strategy, it would make mining interesting and dynamic. And potentially, if you did it right, challenging. And
because it's not all handed to you. You have to search for it.
And here's the other thing. It's learnable too. Because with the current thing, it's like, it's very opaque which levels things spawn more or less on. And because it's a statistics thing, first you have to remember where you found things and then keep track of it. But if it's something more transparent, like, oh, it just always spawns in diorite, that's really easy to pick up. And it's easy to learn, which is great. You don't no longer have to go to the Minecraft wiki to learn it. And then it's like, for the players who are a little bit slow and can't work it out, then here's the other thing. It's like, what way do we have to store information in game?
Basically books.
Yes. And like, you can mine for resources and stuff, so that, and so outside of like music discs and stuff, which are kind of very niche things, there's not a lot to go looking for and exploring for, which I've always found disappointing, because I kind of want a reason to take on the challenge of exploring and stuff. And like, you've got the maps which point you to a specific location of something, but it's almost mind-numbingly simple.
Yeah.
And mind-numbingly simple is not a great solution for something. What if you used the books? And so like, libraries, like, you go looking for libraries because they've got books. And
tomes of information about the game.
Yes. And then you don't, and then that's potentially even a way to discover more arcane recipes. Maybe some recipes aren't in the, thing.
Book.
Yeah, maybe you don't only have to say, maybe you don't just need bookshelves, you need certain books in the bookshelves for certain enchantments. I think that would be interesting. I don't know if it's if it would work out long term, but it would be interesting to at least have a go at playing with that idea and exploring it.
Yeah, and you can copy those books, but you can't produce them from scratch.
Yes. And then maybe the more you have of a certain book, the more likely it is to get a certain enchantment.
And that way you can game the enchanting system without it being illegal almost.
Yes.
It's designed for you to manipulate it in a way that you want.
And maybe it ultimately gives you a way of more kindly, potentially, eventually, like treasure enchantments stop becoming treasure enchantments, but like, you can get them at an enchantment table, but it just means that you have to find the book that allows you to enchant it with, and that could be very interesting.
Yeah.
and then you have like certain enchantments that you have to go to the end for or something. Like, I mean, not that I want to like, what's the word for it, like gate certain levels behind certain achievements, because it's like going to the end and all of that sort of stuff is like, you shouldn't want your only reason to go there to be to look for something. But it's nice to have that reason also to look for something. And it's like all the loot that you get at places like that isn't actually that valuable, to be honest. Like the enchanted diamond stuff, it's like you just make your own. You don't even have to go to the end for it. And sure, maybe it's nice that you can go to the end for it, but it's like... And here's another thing. You know how enchantments are capped and like... And anvils you can only enchant to a certain level?
Yeah.
What if you could just keep going?
Then you could just keep going.
Yes, and maybe then, like, a diamond tools, a golden tools would actually be useful. Because what's their claim to fame? They're enchantable.
And that's the only reason people use gold. Well, that's the only good thing people have about gold tools, and it's still not enough to be useful. Got a few cows here.
Yep. As I was saying. About the just stack a heap of cows and it doesn't matter how you do it. Which means you're incentivized to be ugly and unpleasant. So, other things about the swamp. We have mangroves.
Yep.
With the propagules, which are interesting. I think.
That kind of sounds like an entity that will plant itself. An entity that affects the world.
Yeah, the other thing it sounded like to me was self-growing trees.
Yes.
Like, because
you'd still need to cut down the tree for the propagules to expand.
Well, because you've got the propagules on the tree that grow down towards the water, right? And in order for that, as far as I can see, to like work well and properly, that they'd have to like gradually grow down and then potentially like start a new tree or something, and then or did they fall off and then float in the water for a while and just start a new tree? In which case they just act like a normal sapling.
I kind of understood for it to be, if you cut the tree down, then they'd float in the water and then eventually act as a sapling.
Okay, that's interesting.
Once again, I might be misunderstanding it.
I kind of like that idea, because it also makes mangrove trees a lot more static, which is something you would want from a creative perspective. But then if there's some way, like, because you can use shears to stop certain things from growing, say. What if you could use shears to stop the propagules from growing? Well, the funny thing with leather being able to craft a saddle is then you could kill one horse to ride another.
More than one horse. You can craft leather horse armor now, though.
Oh, that's nice.
If I remember correctly.
Yeah, six leather, I think it was. Fireflies, what did you think of the firefly texture?
They looked like particles.
2 pixel particles.
Yeah. And I think it could quite easily. Well, if we're talking about just the texture, I
Yeah.
don't think there was any real problem with the texture.
Okay. Because from up close, I didn't find it particularly pleasant to look at. But
Yeah, not the most interesting, but
from a distance, I like the flashing.
mm,
You could say they look like a little like XP orbs.
a bit, yeah, except not circular.
Yes. It's funny because XP orbs, I mean, they're pixelated and all, but they're circular. But then you could say that about like textures and stuff. We bred all this lot of cows. They're starting to multiply and take over. I mean, even if more animals than just cows, or than just sheep, would eat the grass, that would be interesting.
Yeah. And then you'd have to.
And then they die if they don't get
grass.
enough food.
Yeah.
What else is there to talk about? The root blocks? What did you think about them?
I hope they're transparent. Well, more than transparent, they're half not there so that we can actually move through them.
But you can definitely move around them. It looks like that's the plan. For them to be... They're not designed to like block you. It looks like.
Yeah. And I think that's an absolute must, not blocking.
Yeah. Yeah, at least through their like layout. Boat plus chest, what do you think about that?
I think it could be useful. I think it could also go the way of the mule. In that, oh look, movable storage. Oh look, never using it.
I think with
Well,
the movable storage on a boat, it's more likely to be used because at least it's not... It doesn't impede you in any way.
And it's easy to get your hands on, whereas a mule, horses, donkeys, they're quite difficult to get and train.
Yes, and like if you're not riding it, then you need a slime, which is difficult to come across again. But I still feel like it falls... Like, for people who don't go and get an elytra, I think it's going to be a really useful, viable option for them. But anyone who's gone to the end and has an elytra and an elytra and a thing, it's just not... Elytra and shulker boxes, it's just... Sure, it doubles the size of your own inventory almost, but like you're just gonna be flying
along the ground.
Yeah, like if you've got an elytra, you can afford to basically go all the way back home and all the way back forward. That said, I've been traveling with the elytra less and less on the realm now. I mean, it's nice to be able to get around fast, but it's... I just miss so much of the world when I'm an elytra, and I decided I wanted to be a little more grounded.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is the render distance. Like, you're always flying basically at the edge, of the render distance because of how things load in, especially on Realms, which has that additional, because it's a server, and Realms aren't particularly fast by way of servers.
So if you could extend the render distance, you could see more
Potentially.
even when flying.
Potentially, and the new terrain will help to have landmarks that are scaled at an elytra can help you recognize. But with 1.17 especially, it just generally feels like at that sort of scale the world's practically featureless. But
About scale.
I'm pretty confident the terrain gen update is going to help a lot with that sort of issue. Yeah. And then the new wood type. And
it looks almost mixed, but the bridging wood between jungle and oak.
yeah. You know what I think?
No.
Why does the Azalea still not have its own wood type?
Yeah, I thought about that too.
Like, seriously. I think it's embarrassing, actually, for them. And if it isn't, it should be. Because that's just not how the game works. It's just not. It's got a different leaf block, but it's got the same trunk. So...
yeah, that should be fixed. It should have its own wood type.
yes.
There should,
And... yeah. I was going to change topic. Did you have more you wanted to say on that?
No, I guess just reiterating it. It makes sense
Yeah.
to have a different wood type with each different tree.
Yeah. Yeah, the wood type. And the thing that struck me about the mangroves is that they didn't look like mangroves. Mangroves just don't look like that. I mean they were big and like I could grant that, but it's like mangroves are dense and it all looks like one tree. Basically. Yeah. And then there are propagules everywhere. And most of the propagules won't just won't grow up to be their own tree, as far as I can tell. I mean, I haven't sat there and looked long enough, but just looking at the river here, it's probably been like that for a long time. They don't go in and trim out all the mangroves, and it's like it's pretty dense. The other thing is the mangroves are always either in the water or will be in the water when the tide rises, and they didn't have that for the mangroves that they showed, and that I noticed that.
Yeah,
say.
It seems they know of mangroves, but not much about them.
Yes, so I'll be interested to see if that changes with as they research more and stuff like that, but it's sort of disappointing, especially when they go in like about the like all around the world there are houses built using mud bricks. We want people to be able to build their own home, and I'm like I mean, sure, it's great that it's great that you want people to be able to build their own home, and you want as many people as possible to be able to build their own home. But it's like, it's a game. Most people probably can't build their house in it anyway, because like you're dealing with 1 by 1 by 1 meter blocks. Like you maybe most people can get an approximation, but just from that, like you kinda can't. And then like then it goes even a step beyond that. It's like, are they going to add like black iron bars so I can do the balustrades at our last place? Are they going to add a white door? A white transparent door? Sliding glass doors? Like... Let's face it. Most people can't make their home. They could potentially make something that looks vaguely like it, but it's like those bricks, they look like end stone bricks. Kind of. It's... I feel like it's a disingenuous argument that
they're making to justify the addition of this thing.
Yes. And if that's the only reason they're adding it, well, if they're adding it because they want more people to be able to build their own house, then there are a lot of other things they need to add.
They should start by adding subblock details.
Yes, and then what else does that entail? Like, if it's not just... If you want people to be able to build their own home, what else do you want them to be able to do? If you want everyone to be able to do what they want to do. And... I mean, in the name of inclusivity, you want people to be able to feel included. Like...
And these days, most people don't build with wood or stone. They use plaster.
Yeah, and I mean, you've sort of got concrete, but it's like... I'm all for people being able to build their own homes in Minecraft within the mechanics and visual thing of the game. I don't want that compromised just so people can build their own home. I'm all for people being able to build their own home, and I've tried to build my own home in Minecraft before, and I completely failed, and like, there wasn't even concrete around at that time. And mud bricks, I love the way mud bricks look. I absolutely do. It's just... that seemed a rather poorly thought out argument. And I just wanted to raise it as such.
Yeah.
I will say, I liked the, I liked what I saw of the, like, the renewable clay and mud. I think that's cool, and I love that they're integrating dripstone into it. I love how things work together and like that. And, like, that's part of why I'm kind of upset about, say, the, copper and stuff. Because it's like... why didn't you just make iron bars attract lightning? Like, it's metal too.
And it's already in the game.
Or you could just say redstone. Yeah, or maybe even just the highest point, so you can just yeah, it felt weird. And the other thing you can do with copper is the, what's it called? Is it a looking glass?
Spyglass.
Spyglass, okay. Yeah. So the other thing you can do with it is a spyglass, and that's it, right? Apart from like creative blocks, like
Yeah,
yeah,
building blocks.
building blocks. Yeah,
I think that is about it, yeah.
that's not enough. And I mean, sure, things will come down the line. It's like amethyst is cool with like tinted glass. Like that's cool, but it's like tinted glass and spyglass, and that's it. It's it's really limited and really makes me hope that there's more coming for those things.
I think there would be.
Yeah.
And they're only going to add more. It's not like they remove features.
And I mean, then there's things that's like the spyglass. It's like the spyglass helps you see better, but then you put the amethyst on something else,
Well,
on glass, and then you've got tinted glass, which doesn't let light through. And I'm like,
I hadn't picked up that.
that was really well thought out. And like, I'm not super against copper being used for spyglasses, but it could have just been iron. And I guess that's just how I feel about it. It doesn't feel like it was well justified at all.
Yeah. Mojang's very much because we can.
Yeah, and then I've been finding increasingly that a lot of the new textures, I don't like dripstone. You see that beside stone, and that's actually, it doesn't look good at all, I feel. And then it's like amethyst also feels like such, because have a look at the grass texture and the chest texture, and then have a look at, I don't know what's a good, like you know, the changes they made to the wheat texture, for example.
Yeah.
I still prefer the old one so much more,
Okay.
because it wasn't ashamed of the fact that it was pixely. While new textures, say the compost texture, feels like it's afraid to be pixely. It's like the chest has a border on it, for crying out loud. The crafting table has a border. The furnace has a border. While everything else feels like it's... And it's like the grass texture, it has a border on the green. It literally has a border on the green. It's not afraid to be pixelated, and a lot of this new stuff feels like it's ashamed of the fact that it's pixelated.
Okay.
And that, I think, I didn't mind the rooted dirt, but I did mind the texture of the mangrove. Like, part of it's nice because it's like, okay, this is a soft wood versus a harder wood like oak or something. And I feel like there's a bit of... I feel like the new ore textures encapsulate that contradiction most obviously. When you set... Like, if you set the new ore textures beside stone, they just... The new textures look like they're blurry. While...
Yeah.
while the old textures look like they were literally made out of, like most of them, it's like you've also got the chest, which is like a blurry-ish texture. But it's like you've got a little bit of that detail, and I mean you have, like when you're trying to do something like cobblestone, but at least it wasn't afraid of the fact that it was like that. So
Creepers. Too many creepers.
I'm not a fan of how Minecraft looks visually anymore, and that extends to the mud texture. I didn't like it at all. I hope it's not the final texture. And I mean, I know there was a texture recently that they revealed it at Minecon last year, but then they kept iterating on it until it worked. Until it was a lot better. I can't remember which texture it was. Because I know they spent a long time on the ore textures, which is why it makes me feel so bad to criticize them. Because they came a long way, but I still don't like them. I like the emerald texture best because it fits in with classic Minecraft, but then it doesn't fit with any of the other new ore textures. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
So I'm cautiously optimistic, I guess, about them working on the textures and perfecting them, but
But you don't like the prospects.
No, I don't. And it's like, if you look at the ice texture, for example, it's like, the grass texture, like, it repeats, obviously, but it's not obvious that it repeats, and neither is the stone texture. Like, you can't tell the individual blocks, but, like, looking from a distance at say, the ice, I can totally tell where it repeats over and over. Like, I can tell better with the new cobblestone, I think, than the old cobblestone. That said, it's been a while since I've used the old cobblestone. I mean, with ores, it's going to be obvious, and the wood texture is pretty good. It's like, even the, what is it, the, what's it called, the stripped wood? It's darkened on the edges to look like it's rounded.
Yeah, which means put together you can tell where the boundary between two blocks are.
And yeah, and that doesn't... Oh, I'm out of wheat. That doesn't work for a block game that's trying to unashamedly be a block game. So that bothers me a lot. Especially now that I'm so into building. I mean, I do like building with this new stripped textures. I don't feel great about them.
Yeah.
Okay, what else is there to talk about? Yeah, there was drip leaf in the swamp. I don't know if they placed that there or they're making a thing of it, so who knows.
Would be good to have somewhere above ground where it's accessible, because currently if it can only be found in underwater places,
Yeah.
underground.
Yeah. I've got some comments about the next update. So just on how and this is, I guess, what I was talking about with the design of things like mobs and updates and stuff. A lot of things are seemingly designed in isolation from everything else, and it's like copper. It's like it's in isolation from the fact that there's already a metal which can serve its purpose potentially, and so it's not really well integrated with it, and it doesn't really. It's like new things that are sticky taped on top of each other, and part of that is where it's like a fear of changing the things that already exist. And the terrain update was like a good example against that. It's like zoomed out, and that's, as far as I can tell, that's where the benefit of the terrain update was, because it took all these things that weren't working together anymore, and because they weren't working together, they were also not really working within themselves anymore, because of all the compromises they were making, and they took a zoom out and then just made everything work together again properly. And I feel like they need to do more of that. Like, they need to account for the interaction between the mobs in the environment and the environment. For example, because they're zoomed too far in on the single mob, it's like, what biome does it spawn in? What does it do? What value does it provide? And I guess goats were nice because they were just part of the environment, and that's nice about goats. Except they don't actually headbutt mobs as much as we were led to believe, which is a shame. I was looking forward to that.
Screaming goats do it more often.
Yeah, but I've not seen a single screaming goat so far.
1 in 50 are screaming goats.
1 in 50?
Yep.
Why isn't it 1 in 5?
Because then they'd be too common.
Yeah, but now no one's gonna find any of them. And then it's like the textures seem to be also, it's like there's not a great variety of comparing. It doesn't seem like the textures are really well integrated into the rest of the game, and not matching the visual style. And the most obvious thing is like comparing dirt versus sand. It's like the new sand texture doesn't quite match the dirt like it used to. It's like one's been blurred and the other hasn't. And so if I was to make make a request to the developers, the request would probably just be, please, like, make things work together. Like take what you learned from the terrain update, Caves and Cliffs Part 2, and how making everything work together worked so well. And it would be nice if that could be brought to other parts of the game and fully made Minecraft feel like a more cohesive and well thought out game again, that has care put into every aspect of it. That doesn't feel arbitrary and meaningless and all that.